With eyes of faith, I see beyond the darkness. With eyes of faith, there's nothing more to see.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. You're watching the finale in a series of videos in which I've been following the material shown to Jehovah's Witnesses at their 2021 Powerful by Faith convention, which, as with last year's convention, has been taking place virtually due to the need for social distancing. In this final installment, which covers the 2-hour, 17-minute long Sunday afternoon session of the convention, we can look forward to the spectacle of Bible prophet Daniel getting thrown into a pit brimming with lion sound effects. We also get to witness acting standards in a Bible drama plummet to an all-time low.
To gaze upon the pleasantness of Jehovah. And to look with appreciation on his temple.
We find out that Kenny Rogers never really died. He simply went back in time to console an aging prophet Daniel.
O Daniel, you very precious man, I have been sent to you. Do not be afraid, Daniel.
Meanwhile, Stephen Lett shows us how much he knows about evolution.
Evolution teaches that our ancestors were apes. How could we feel happy and feel loved thinking that an ape was our father?
Stephen Lett also tells his audience to send apostates down the highway.
What if an apostate knocked at your front door and said, "I'd like to come into your home, I'd like to sit down with you, and I'd like to teach you some apostate ideas"? Well, you would immediately get rid of him, wouldn't you? You would send him down the highway.
And in an unexpected twist, I somehow make it to paradise.
With Jehovah by my side, I will not run and hide. My God is with me, this I know.
Now, as you can see, we have a lot to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Over here.
Hail Nebo, Ishtar, and Marduk. Greatest god of all!
May you live on forever. There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods. He will tell you the interpretation.
Who is this man?
Daniel.
Daniel? Who's Daniel?
I've heard concerning you that you're able to provide interpretations. Now,
If you're able to read the writing and make its interpretation known to me, then you will be clothed with purple. A gold necklace will be placed around your neck, and you will rule as the third one in the kingdom.
You may keep your gifts. Give your presents to others. However, I will read the writing to the king. This is the interpretation of the words. Meaning, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found lacking. Perez, your kingdom's been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians.
So, as you might have guessed, we're watching part 2 of the Bible drama, the Bible movie, Daniel, A Lifetime of Faith. We saw part 1 on Saturday afternoon. Now we've moved on in the story to where Daniel is an old man, and it's 539 BCE, the overthrow of Babylon by the Persians. The Persians, not the Medes, as I will come to. And I have to admit, as with the immense image depiction in part 1 and the immense tree, I really enjoyed the special effects. The Watchtower geek inside me was rejoicing to see this well-known Bible story so vividly brought to life. Do I think any of this happened? No. But it's still a very compelling story. And even to this day, you could argue, we use the phrase, the writings on the wall, meaning something bad is about to happen. And this story is where we get that phrase from. So from a cultural point of view and from a historical or biblical point of view, I enjoy seeing this scene depicted. Do I enjoy the fact that it's being depicted in a drama that's being used to coerce and manipulate Jehovah's Witnesses? No, but I can take it in isolation and enjoy it nonetheless. And interestingly, it's kind of a metaphor for me, this whole writings on the wall thing, if you think about it, for the situation the organization finds itself in now. So the Jehovah's Witness religion has reached a point where it is so abusive and so corrupt that on Saturday afternoon we had a governing body member, David Splain, effectively downplaying the concept of being a criminal, downplaying the judicial system, downplaying criminal convictions, and making excuses for paying off survivors of abuse with settlements. This is an organization that has strayed so far in a really dark and sinister direction. And I felt that in particular, the Tekel part of the message, you have been weighed in the balances and found lacking. Well, that's definitely how I feel when I look at the Jehovah's Witness organization, when I look at its leadership, the governing body. They have been weighed in the balances. We can all see very clearly what's going on, what their policies are with regards to child abuse, shunning, blood transfusions. They have had opportunity after opportunity to fix things, to make things right, to do the right thing as leaders of an organization numbering into the millions of followers. They stubbornly stick to these abusive practices. And in a way, David Splain's desperate rant against apostates on Saturday afternoon was a bit like, for me at least, a writing on the wall moment, because when they are so desperate that they need to give that kind of talk for 34 minutes, when they are so desperate that they need to downplay what it means to be a criminal, almost paving the way for their own arrest and conviction, you know this is time to get out. You know that this is an organization that has lost all credibility and deserves to lose its membership. So that was my takeaway from this scene, but I think it's also worth commenting on the historical inaccuracy of what we're watching. In part one, or during my rebuttal to part one of this drama, I drew your attention to an article by Professor Richard Carrier titled "How We Know Daniel is a Forgery." Incidentally, this article was only written as recently as May 9th, 2021, but it is a fantastically well-researched and eye-opening article explaining how we know. It's not in any doubt. It's not like this is a contested view. The consensus of Bible scholars is that the book of Daniel is a forgery. And Dr. Richard Carrier goes to the trouble of spelling out very clearly how we know this to be the case. And there's a clue that Daniel is a forgery in the scene that we've just witnessed, because we see Daniel interpret the writing on the wall in this way.
Perez, your kingdom's been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians.
Your kingdom has been divided. So the insinuation is divided in two, and given to the Medes and the Persians. Well, that's simply not what happened in 539 BCE. In 539 BCE, Babylon fell to the Persians, not the Medes and Persians, not the Medes, but to the Persians. So we might well ask, how can the book of Daniel get it wrong and talk about Medes when Medes weren't even a factor? And I thought I'd read a couple of parts of Dr. Richard Carrier's article to explain this. The actual author of Daniel was simply very ill-informed about the Babylonian and Persian eras and is struggling to make up anything he can using famous names vaguely known here and about, and also to fix failed prophecies in Jeremiah, who predicted the Medes would vanquish the Babylonians. It ended up being the Persians instead, and this can explain why Daniel has changed Darius into a Mede, which all indicates Daniel was most likely written centuries later than it purports. I will revisit that thing about Jeremiah very shortly. Later on in the article, it continues, there was never any such thing as a joint rule between Medes and Persians. Mede was a conquered province of Persia, nor any law of the Persians and Medes that governed that empire. This pairing of Medes and Persians here is a fabrication of Daniel. It is recorded nowhere else, not even in Persia's own laws, decrees, inscriptions, and declarations, nor even in Greek histories of the period. Neither Herodotus nor Xenophon mention any such thing. Isn't that interesting? We would read this story or read the Bible account of the overthrow of Babylon and hear about the Medes, and we would just take it on face value. Oh yes, it was a coalition between the Medes and the Persians. They joined forces and overthrew Babylon. But actually, when you look at history, there was no such thing as the Medes and Persians. It seems that the writer of Daniel was simply trying to cover up for the fact, or explain the fact, that the writer of Jeremiah had predicted that the Medes would overthrow Babylon wrongly. wrongly predicted that the Medes would overthrow Babylon. And this prediction can be found in Jeremiah chapter 51. So verse 11 says, "Polish the arrows, take up the circular shields. Jehovah has stirred up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, because he intends to bring Babylon to ruin. For this is the vengeance of Jehovah, the vengeance for his temple." And then later on in verses 28 and 29, "Appoint against her the nations, the kings of Media, its governors and all its deputy rulers, and all the lands they rule over, and the earth will quake and tremble, for the thoughts of Jehovah against Babylon will be carried out, to make the land of Babylon an object of horror without an inhabitant." So Jeremiah emphatically predicts that Babylon will be overthrown, not by the Babylonians, but by the Medes. And so then the writer of Daniel, because Daniel is a forgery and not actually written by Daniel based on his insider knowledge as a senior official in the courts of Babylon, because the whole thing's a forgery and they are trying to make everything square up with what's been written elsewhere by other Bible writers, they have to introduce this concept of the Medes being somehow involved in the overthrow of Babylon, and the ruler of Babylon subsequent to this invasion being called Darius the Mede.
King Darius, this is Daniel, a Jew taken captive by the Babylonians.
Did you interpret the handwriting from the gods?
No. And not me, O king. My God, the God of Israel.
We could use a satrap who understands the captives. I confess, a satrap is not as prominent a position as Belshazzar granted you.
My lord, Daniel refused every gift and honor Belshazzar offered him.
A man without a price. We don't need you as a satrap. We need you over them. Tura, pronounce Daniel's appointment throughout the kingdom. I'll want those stealing from the treasury to know that they will now be held accountable.
Another revolt?
This is far more troubling. I just collected the land tax from an administrator.
Did he pay?
Yes, but he refuses to give us our fees.
I've had the same problem. They're calling anything more than the tax extortion.
What's changed?
Daniel.
Have you offered him anything to make him more reasonable?
He won't take a shekel of silver.
Daniel claims that what he receives is more than enough.
Don't be so naive. He's putting on a show of integrity for the king.
It won't last. Darius will tire of him soon enough.
Oh dear, so here we have Daniel's opposers, Daniel's enemies scheming against him, and this will be a recurring theme throughout this part 2 of the drama. It seems fairly obvious that these enemies of Daniel are being portrayed in such a way as to cause a connection in the minds of Jehovah's Witnesses with apostates. So this is apparently what apostates do. They scheme in the shadows. They come up with ways to undermine the authority of the governing body using underhanded means. Again, this plot line is going to play out further on, and we're going to see these opposers of Daniel, these enemies, really show their true colors and show just how evil they are. But let's talk about Darius the Mede, who we see there appointing Daniel to a position of incredible prominence within the kingdom. He is in a position where he's ruling over the satraps. He has authority over essentially what all the governors in the empire are doing. And this, again, is how we know that the book of Daniel is a forgery, Because if Daniel really had this level of prominence, really had this authority, this knowledge of how the empire worked, both the Babylonian Empire and the Persian Empire, he wouldn't be making such rookie mistakes about fundamentals of the history of that period. For example, Babylon was captured by Cyrus the Great. In fact, in this convention, they've made a big deal about the fact that the book of Isaiah supposedly predicted that Cyrus would take Babylon 200 years in advance. Please see my sushi, in which I explain how that is simply not true. But in any case, in this drama, we've heard noise made about the fact that Cyrus was the one who took Babylon. That being the case, who's this Darius guy? This Darius the Mede. We've already learned about the Medes and the fact that they had nothing to do with the fall of Babylon. So why have Darius there? If Cyrus has taken the city, why put Darius in charge? Let's hear what Richard Carrier has to say in his article. Again, How We Know Daniel is a Forgery. There will be a link in the description because this is wonderful information and very timely if you think about it, given that this was written or posted online as recently as May 2021. In the article, Dr. Carrier says, Daniel then invents a king who never existed, Darius the Mede. Daniel claims he took over the kingdom after Belshazzar was killed. In fact, the actual king of the Babylonians was not killed. The Persians, not the Medes, took over Nabonidus' kingdom and spared his life. The real fate of his son and sometimes regent Belshazzar is not recorded. Daniel's author was clearly quite confused by the political chronology of this period, mistaking the famous Darius the Great as the Persian king who freed the Jews, when in fact all records show, including other books of the Bible, that it was Cyrus the Great who reigned several kings previous in succession. Darius succeeded only after Cyrus's sons had their turn at the throne, first Cambyses and then Bardia. Daniel even confused who fathered whom, getting the line of succession exactly backwards. Daniel says Darius was the son of Xerxes. In fact, Xerxes the Great was the son of Darius. Darius's father was Hystaspes, probably butchering the pronunciation, a distant relative of Cyrus the Great. So I realize I may be bursting the bubble of quite a number of you watching this who may be believers in the Bible, who may believe the Bible to be the inerrant word of God. But these are all valid points, aren't they, that can't just be shrugged off. How could the writer of Daniel get it so wrong, especially if Daniel was supposedly such a senior official under both the Babylonians and Persians?
Have I really been in Babylon over 70 years? Jeremiah's prophecy.
When 70 years of Babylon are fulfilled, I will turn my attention to you, and I will make good my promise by bringing you back to this place.
Judah.
Oh, Jehovah, do hear, do forgive. Oh, Jehovah, do pay attention and act. Do not delay for your own sake. Oh, my God.
Oh, Daniel. Now I have come to give you insight and understanding. When you began your entreaty, the word went out, and I have come to report it to you.
What's the good news?
Jehovah has long told us we will return to Judah. I looked again at Jeremiah's prophecy. This is what Jehovah says. When 70 years at Babylon are fulfilled, I will make good my promise by bringing you back to this place. 70 years. That means God's people will return soon.
How can you be sure?
Jehovah sent an angel to tell me.
An angel?
He said that the city and its temple will be rebuilt, and Messiah will finally come. You will get to see the temple rebuilt.
But won't it be dangerous?
Jehovah is eager to fulfill the needs of his people. He told Isaiah, we won't bear children for distress, for they're the offspring made up of those blessed by Jehovah. And if Jehovah says it,
It's as good as done.
But isn't the land desolate?
that's why we'll need skilled builders for the restoration work.
Ooh, skilled builders are needed for the restoration work. Jehovah needs his people to build stuff. Isn't that an interesting message for them to be including in this year's drama? As we've already seen on this program, this is an organization that is obsessed with building stuff to the extent where they encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to give up their jobs to go and volunteer on construction projects. So it's no surprise at all that they would weave this in and make sure Jehovah's Witnesses get this link between building in Bible times and building in the modern day. But I just wanted to talk briefly on this whole 70 years thing, because obviously this is part of the reasoning Jehovah's Witnesses use to establish 607 BCE for the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar's forces. More on this topic in this video here. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will magically appear. But yes, they say if Babylon fell in 539 BCE, it would have taken a couple of years for the Jews to return to Jerusalem, which takes us to 537 BCE. Remembering we count down, don't we, as we move through history when we're talking about BCE. So 537 is when the Jews apparently end their exile in Babylon. What happens if you count 70 years backwards in time? You get to 607 BCE. So that's one of the reasons why Watchtower points to 607 BCE for the downfall, the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar's forces, even though we know through history, we know through archaeology, we know through countless cuneiform tablets that this event actually happened in 587 BCE for reasons I explain and go into in more depth in the video. Now, in my 607 BCE video, I touch on this whole 70-year thing and point to the reasoning of Carl Olof Jonsson that this was not a period of exile. This was not a period of total desolation for Jerusalem. Rather, when you read Jeremiah's words, when you read the prophecy in Jeremiah, it's pointing to a 70-year period of servitude. In other words, Judah and the surrounding nations would be in servitude to Babylon for 70 years. So Watchtower is reading too much into this verse in suggesting that the exile had to be exactly 70 years in length, which brings us to this verse that gets quoted here in the Daniel drama, Jeremiah 29, verse 10.
70 years at Babylon are fulfilled. I will turn my attention to you, and I will make good my promise by bringing you back to this place.
So my 607 BCE video points quite extensively to the work of Carl Olof Jonsson, who wrote this book, The Gentile Times Reconsidered. And Jonsson actually has an entire chapter on this issue of the 70-year exile. And he has a section on page 211. By the way, I'm not sure how you'd get a copy of this book anymore. The last I heard, and don't quote me on this, the last I heard was that there was some efforts to put this back in print. But as I understand it, this book is currently out of print. So you'll have to take my word for it. But there is a section on page 211, 70 years at Babylon, or for Babylon. So in other words, is there a little bit of trickery being done in the New World Translation when it comes to how this verse is rendered? Jonsson writes, the New World Translation's rendering of Jeremiah 29 verse 10 seems to depict the 70 years as a period of captivity, 70 years at Babylon. Although it is true that the Hebrew preposition here translated at in certain expressions may have a local sense, in brackets at or in, its general meaning is for, to, in regard to, with reference to, and is so rendered at Jeremiah 29 verse 10 by most modern translations. The following examples are taken from some of the better-known translations in English, and then he lists examples. The Revised Version, 1885, after 70 years be accomplished for Babylon. Rotherham's The Emphasized Bible, that as soon as there are fulfilled to Babylon, 70 years. American Standard Version, after 70 years are accomplished for Babylon. New American Standard Version, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon. New International Version, when 70 years are completed for Babylon. The New Jerusalem Bible, when the 70 years granted to Babylon are over. So I think we can see what's happening here. It's not entirely dishonest to render this verse as saying 70 years in Babylon, because there is at least some precedent for interpreting the verse in this way. But the point is, really it should be for Babylon or to Babylon. In other words, when 70 years of Babylon's rule over the nations are complete, then this is going to happen. Then God's people will return to Jerusalem. So I just wanted to talk about that because I realize many of you are very interested, justifiably, in this whole 607 BCE thing, because let's remember, it's 607 BCE that gets you to 1914, to the beginning of the last days, and ultimately 1914 is the basis for the organization to claim to be God's faithful and discreet slave, because it was shortly after 1914, in 1919, when the organization was supposedly chosen by Jesus. So if you're perhaps perplexed by this verse and thinking, maybe the organization is right about this 70-year period, no, it's not quite as simple as that, for reasons that Carl Olof Jonsson explains. And incidentally, in his article, Richard Carrier has this period of exile as much less than 70 years, in fact 49 years. So Dr. Carrier counts from 587 BCE to 538 BCE, which is actually 49 years. So you could argue that the prophecy in Jeremiah was just wrong to begin with, as it was in predicting that Babylon would be captured by the Medes.
Daniel, about that satrap in Susa, should he be replaced?
My men have thoroughly investigated, and the satrap has been diverting palace money to his own pocket.
That's impossible.
Isn't he your nephew, Latanus?
Indeed. And I can vouch for his integrity.
There must be some mistake.
How can Daniel know his character as I do? I will speak with him and resolve the matter.
We Medes and Persians are not as intolerant as these Jews. I'm sure we can fix this.
Very well. Settle it quickly, and that will be all.
All you Jews do is pray.
I could not serve the king the way I do without God's help.
Serve the king by intimidating satraps.
I've only done what I should.
An outsider has no place telling us how to conduct business.
I act in the king's interest.
We've heard how you acted in Nebuchadnezzar's interest. You made him go insane.
That was a message from Jehovah.
Call it what you will, but do not interfere with us.
Daniel, he served the Babylonian kings well, but...
He's so old.
What Otanis means is, at Daniel's age, how reliable is his judgment?
His ideas are outdated.
Besides, he is a Jew.
Katu, we're tolerant of all peoples.
Yes, of course, that's my point.
Daniel, we were just talking about you. You were right. There's been a revolt in Susa. They demand a new satrap, one who doesn't steal from them.
But my lord, surely...
Enough. I sent my own inspectors, men I trust. Daniel, you've distinguished yourself over these men. Imagine what I could do if you were my prime minister.
Perhaps we could approach the king.
That's no use. Daniel's manipulating him.
We need an accusation against Daniel, something Darius can't ignore.
But no one's accused him of anything.
Not yet. Assemble a team to comb through our laws. Surely he's violated something. You, interview merchants, inspectors, officials, whoever will make an accusation against him. Assure the accuser he will be generously rewarded. We have the Babylonian records. Search for any scandal that might implicate him.
So again, we're watching part 2 of this year's Bible drama, Daniel, A Lifetime of Faith. In part 1, I drew your attention to a number of instances in which there were kind of hidden messages, stuff that had been inserted in the Daniel narrative to underscore certain values that Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to have, or certain ways that Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to think. In this case, there's a very clear narrative against apostates because Daniel's opposers, Daniel's enemies, are quite clearly being depicted in the evil, scheming way that the organization wants Jehovah's Witnesses to think of apostates. Now, that being the intention, these portrayals are quite clearly silly and overblown and unrealistic. For example, you get the scene where Daniel's enemies confront him and try to intimidate him and question him. Well, if Daniel is supposed to be the governing body, at what point do apostates get to speak to the governing body? At what point do people like myself or other ex-Jehovah's Witness activists get to have any contact whatsoever with the governing body so that we can bring the concerns of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and many current Jehovah's Witnesses to the governing body so that we can plead with them and say, please, can you be more reasonable? Please, can you be more sensitive to the needs of the people that you have made yourselves responsible for? The governing body seal themselves off and don't let anyone confront them. Don't let anyone question them or interrogate them. In fact, the only time I can think of, certainly in modern history, where a governing body member has been held accountable would be Jeffrey Jackson at the Australian Royal Commission. And the ones questioning him there were not apostates, were not ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. It was a royal commission. It was Angus Stewart, the senior counsel on behalf of the commission, asking very reasonable questions of Jeffrey Jackson. And Jeffrey Jackson used that opportunity to lie and obfuscate. So this portrayal, if Daniel is supposed to be standing in for the governing body here, this portrayal of Daniel versus his opposers is completely unrealistic and not what we've seen in recent times. As for corruption, because we see the opposers there plotting to bribe people to come forward with evidence against Daniel, if I'm seeing any corruption anywhere, it's with the governing body and, for example, their openness in settling abuse lawsuits rather than defending them, or rather than owning up to their failings. And in fact, we saw on the Saturday afternoon governing body member David Splain justifying this policy of settling child abuse lawsuits using the Bible. I realize that there's a difference between bribing someone for information and making a settlement in a lawsuit, but come on, it's shady, isn't it? This is a shady tactic. So in portraying opposers of God's people, they can't help but inadvertently, in my view at least, show the exact same tactics that they themselves are using. And I found it interesting when Daniel's enemies were before Belshazzar, and they brought up the whole issue of tolerance.
We Medes and Persians are not as intolerant as these Jews. I'm sure we can fix this.
This seemed, to me at least, to be an attempt at preparing Jehovah's Witnesses for the sorts of criticisms that they can expect to hear from outsiders when it comes to, for example, the Jehovah's Witness views on homosexuals, because this is obviously a homophobic religion. Like most Bible literalists, like most Christian fundamentalists, Jehovah's Witnesses seem to have a problem with homosexuality. And is it any wonder? Because in Leviticus 20 verse 13, it calls for the death of gay people. How can you not be against gay people if you take the Bible to be the inerrant word of God when the Bible is condemning gay people? And that is obviously a quintessentially intolerant position to take. And in fact, we had this whole scenario depicted for us in the 2018 convention.
Displaying courage now will help me display courage in the future.
Well, I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and we believe the Bible teaches sex is for a man and a woman who are married.
Intolerant people.
So there again, a Jehovah's Witness is accused of being intolerant, just the same as in the Daniel drama, where Daniel, and in fact all Jews, are accused of being intolerant. This seems to me to be another hidden message. It's the governing body's way of telling Jehovah's Witnesses, you're going to hear this. You're going to have people accuse you of being intolerant, but don't worry, you're not being intolerant. You're just sticking to God's standards.
There's nothing in the records.
Anything.
Not a shekel of silver is missing. In fact, when Daniel gets involved, corruption and loss go down.
Keep searching.
No one will speak against him. They all love him. And he has the king's trust. Usually the foreign merchants are ignored when they experience theft. However, Daniel stands up for them and investigates. He has thieves return whatever was stolen.
Even his friends are spotless. Nebuchadnezzar once forbade anyone to speak against their God.
Supposedly, this Jehovah saved them from the furnace when they refused to worship a Babylonian god.
Jews won't worship other gods.
So it would seem.
I think you've solved our problem.
Katu? Montanus? What favor do you seek?
O King Darius, may you live on forever. This Babylon, of which you are king, is mighty but diverse.
There are Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, and others.
Yes, Montanus, I know these things.
You are the rightful king, but also a foreigner and a newcomer. The people must adapt, or the kingdom could become unstable.
What do you suggest?
All royal officials, prefects, satraps, high royal officers, and governors have consulted together to establish a royal decree and to enforce a ban.
That for 30 days, whoever makes a petition to any god or man, except to you, O king, should be thrown into the lion's pit.
I, Darius the Mede, make this decree. For 30 days, anyone who makes a petition to any god or man, except to the king, should be thrown into the lion's pit.
So Daniel's scheming adversaries come up with the ultimate plan. Having gone through all of the records, having examined Daniel's history, they can't find anything to pin on him because he is blameless. He does everything above board. There's no corruption. He can't be bought. And they figure out that the way to get Daniel is to have this decree issued, this royal decree, which effectively bans anyone from offering any petition to any god or man for a period of 30 days, knowing full well that Daniel is in the habit of praying, I think, 3 times per day to God. Of course, none of this happened. As I've already explained, the book of Daniel is a forgery. This is a made-up story, but it's still interesting to view this narrative or this depiction from the point of view of the way the governing body wants Jehovah's Witnesses to think of apostates. Because it's again presenting a very misleading image of effectively the governing body being blameless. If we put Daniel in place of the governing body and we put Daniel's enemies in place of the apostates, what this is saying is, oh, you can't find anything that you could pin on the governing body. You'll never find any reasonable basis for criticizing the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses. Of course, that's completely untrue. If it were true, the organization would not be waist deep in problems with the mishandling of child abuse, in child abuse lawsuits. It would not have blood on its hands due to its blood policy. There would be no evidence of the psychological trauma caused by the policy of tearing apart families on ideological grounds. There would be no one who's suffered due to the organization's domestic violence policy, namely the policy whereby spouses have to stay with abusive partners and stay married to them for life. You're not allowed to leave someone, even if your life is in danger, if there is no adultery. There is indictment upon indictment when it comes to this organization. There is accusation upon accusation upon accusation. You simply cannot say that the governing body has this spotless record, which seems to be the hidden message here. They are seeing themselves in the role of Daniel, who was blameless and who everyone loved. I can assure you, not everyone loves the governing body. It can't even be said that all Jehovah's Witnesses love the governing body, because the very nature of this organization is that it holds people captive. It forces people to identify as Jehovah's Witnesses even after they've stopped believing, because they are terrified of the cruelest penalties if they're ever outed as unbelievers and shunned by their families.
You know me. And so do my enemies. I pray at my window. 3 times a day, every day. If I even appeared to compromise, what would they think?
That you stop praying altogether.
Or even worse, that I had traded my worship for my life. I know Jehovah. And if I trust him, he'll reward me. I don't know how, but he will. Pray that I keep my faith, that we all keep our faith, no matter how this ends. Hear me, O Jehovah. When I cry out, show me favor. And answer me. Your face, O Jehovah, I will seek to find. For you are my helper. Do not forsake me or leave me. My God of salvation.
So the trap is sprung. Daniel is defiant on this issue of praying. No royal decree is going to come between him and his daily prayers to Jehovah. His enemies know this, and so as soon as he goes to pray, they burst in and arrest him. And we will see what becomes of him as this drama progresses. But again, very strong messages here for Jehovah's Witnesses when it comes to, first of all, their perception of apostates, or how they are to perceive apostates, namely as wicked, scheming people. But also, there is this persecution, siege mentality very strongly alluded to here. You have that visual of Daniel kneeling down to pray, and his opposers pouring into the room and circling round him, and the way the camera moves around Daniel on a rotational axis, or whatever you call it, kind of emphasizes the fact that Daniel is completely surrounded. And it was very evocative of the images that we saw at the end of, I'm going to say it was the 2018 Be Courageous convention, where you saw the witnesses in the field and the people with assault weapons, the police, closing in on them. This seems to be the idea, the perception that the governing body wants Jehovah's Witnesses to have in their minds when it comes to Satan's system. The governing body needs Jehovah's Witnesses to feel encircled or besieged by Satan's forces. And that, for me, is very strongly the hidden message there. There's another hidden message, though, in the conversation that Daniel has with his friends. You'll notice where Daniel says,
if I even appeared to compromise, what would they think?
That you stop praying altogether.
Or even worse, that I had traded my worship for my life.
Or even worse, that I'd trade my worship for my life, meaning my life is of secondary importance to my worship. So it's unthinkable in Daniel's mind that there could ever be anyone seeing his behavior or seeing his conduct and thinking this guy is putting his life ahead of his worship. And when you think about it, there's quite a chilling echo of this mentality when it comes to the organization's view of blood. That's an area in which Jehovah's Witnesses are very definitely not just urged, but it's demanded of them that they put their worship ahead of their lives. So that if blood is needed in order to save life, they need to martyr themselves effectively. They need to refuse blood because the worship comes first. This, for me, is the source of fanaticism that is alluded to in this part of the drama.
Daniel should indeed be made an example of. I will remove him from his post and expel him from the city tomorrow morning.
My lord.
All will learn that our laws must be obeyed.
But the law actually states that the accused would be thrown into the lion's pit, my lord.
I see what you're doing. Have you no shame?
The law of the Medes and the Persians is that any ban or decree that the king establishes cannot be changed.
We only wish the king to receive the honor he deserves.
Your God, whom you are continually serving, will rescue you.
So we're watching part 2 of this year's Bible drama, Daniel, A Lifetime of Faith, and it's at this point that I'm going to try to put my film critic's hat on. I've been looking at this drama so far from the point of view of whether it's historically accurate, it isn't, and from the point of view of hidden messages about apostates who seem to be the ones depicted by Daniel's opposers. Now I'm going to look purely at the production here, because what we have is a key scene in the Daniel story. Everyone surely heard of Daniel in the lion's pit or the lion's den. It's kind of a key moment that the film should be building up to. And having done quite a bit of legwork in establishing the plot against Daniel and the scheming by his opposers, who again seem to be standing in for apostates in this story, having done all of that hard work, it feels as though they've failed really in giving us any compelling depiction of the lion's den, because what's Daniel been thrown into? A pit with lion sound effects, as far as I can tell. We don't see any actual lions. I mean, granted, it's pretty hard to see anything in this drama because maybe it's just me. Everything seems to be very dark. even when you're not in the pit, even when you're in, I don't know, the royal court or what have you, everything's very dark. And I guess if you're on the film crew, if you're on the production team, you might argue, yes, well, we're trying to be authentic. And in ancient times, they wouldn't have had all that much lighting. Things would have been dark in ancient times. I get that. But I don't know, you're still cheating yourself, really. You're kind of wasting your time when it comes to all of the detail with the costumes and with the props and with the visual effects if people just can't see anything. So for me, it's dark to begin with. But then Daniel's thrown into this equally dark pit, and all we get is, I think, a suggestion of human remains and some growls in the background. Again, just sound effects. You're not telling me that they couldn't have put actual lions in or some suggestion of actual lions, even if it was just some kind of CGI. It feels as though they put all of their efforts into depicting the immense image and the immense tree, which they kind of needed to do because obviously, as far as they're concerned, Daniel is first and foremost a book of prophecy, prophecy that in their view points to the last days and the authority of the governing body. So they're going to put all of their efforts into the depictions of those visions by Nebuchadnezzar, and they've done so at the expense of what, at least in terms of the story is concerned, is a very important scene. And they've let themselves down as far as I'm concerned. And bear in mind, there is another scene that they've omitted from this drama that's also very dramatic and something that absolutely would have been included if this were being done by Hollywood, and that's the scene in Daniel chapter 3 where Daniel and his fellow Hebrews get thrown into a fiery pit for refusing to bow down to a statue. This is alluded to when Daniel's opposers are plotting against him, but it's not actually depicted. And again, this is a key scene. If you're looking at this from the point of view of bringing to life a Bible narrative, you're going to choose the most interesting parts of that narrative. You're going to show the fiery pit. You're going to show Daniel and his colleagues emerging from the fiery pit completely unscathed. They've missed that part of the story completely, again, putting everything into the prophetic visions of Nebuchadnezzar. And then we get to the lion's pit, and they've kind of fobbed us all off by throwing Daniel into a pit that seems to be filled with nothing but sound effects.
Remove the stone! Daniel. Daniel.
O King, may you live on forever.
He lives! Bring him up.
My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions, and they have not harmed me. For I was found innocent before him. Nor have I done any wrong to you, O King.
Armenia is mine. Daniel let them off too easily. We need their exceptional horses for our cavalry. And a few for myself.
Fine. You take Armenia. I have my eye on Bactria and its precious stones.
Must you divide up Daniel's kingdom now? Check the back room.
What is the meaning of this?
You're being arrested for crimes against Darius, the king.
The king ordered Daniel's arrest, not ours.
Daniel was arrested and lifted from the pit this morning, unharmed.
The It can't be. The lions must have already been fed.
Perhaps they were ill. The lions were ill? Not hungry? Throw them and their families into the pit, where they can test their theories.
So we've just seen arguably the most shocking part of the Daniel story, and I had to check what it says in the Bible because I was wondering whether this scene where Darius says, throw the families in the pit, I was wondering whether that was kind of artistic license. But no, it's there in the Bible. If you go to Daniel chapter 6, verse 24, then the king ordered those men who had laid the information against Daniel to be brought and thrown into the lion pit, them, their children, and their wives, and they did not get to the bottom of the pit before the lions had them and had crushed all their bones. Charming story, isn't it? And I suppose if you're an apologist for the Bible, you could say, well, this isn't God's judgment. This is Darius's judgment. But it's clearly been included by the writer of Daniel. And again, we know that Daniel wasn't written by Daniel. It's a forgery. But it was included clearly as basically comeuppance for God's enemies or for Daniel's enemies. This judgment is clearly included as being just desserts, really, for Daniel's opposers. So a really chilling story there. I mean, just imagine children being thrown into a lion's pit for the crimes of their parents, which, if you think about it, is in keeping with the justice of Jehovah in the Bible. Exodus 20 verse 5, for I, Jehovah your God, am a God who requires exclusive devotion, bringing punishment for the error of fathers upon sons, upon the third generation and upon the fourth generation of those who hate me. So again, even though it's Darius who has decided on this judgment, it's sort of in keeping, isn't it, with what's already been decided as being a just or moral standard elsewhere in the scriptures.
I'd love to go home.
But I think it's too late for me.
And I don't want to go either.
Oh, no, don't cry. If you go, you'll see a better city than the one I left. You'll see prophecies fulfilled. A city full of people worshiping Jehovah. And a new temple, the most beautiful building on earth. One thing I have asked from Jehovah. That I might dwell in the house of Jehovah all the days of my life. To gaze upon the blessedness of Jehovah. And to look
with appreciation. And his temple. Well, he's not going to be getting an Oscar for that performance, is he? That was a low point, I think, in a long history of bad acting in these Bible dramas. It's difficult for me to think of a clearer example of bad acting than what we've just seen. That was pretty bad. And up to this point, the guy who's playing elderly Daniel sort of does okay. I think his casting is pretty on point. He's delivered most of his lines in his dialogue in a fairly believable, realistic way. But here it just all unravels. It's like he's been given one task too many. In this particular scene, he's been given this monologue requiring intense emotion. And I guess better actors could have pulled this off, but because he isn't an actor, or he isn't a professional actor, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, yeah, it's just all unraveled there, hasn't it? And I suppose it's at moments like this that you're glad that everything's so dark. What is it with all this darkness? They've really spared us, I suppose, by making it so dark and sparing us from watching this scene in all of its glory. But there was something else I wanted to point out. Again, throughout this movie, throughout this drama, we're seeing little hidden messages here and there that sort of hint at Jehovah's Witness culture and hint at what's expected of Jehovah's Witnesses. I found it interesting when Daniel is in dialogue with his friends and he says,
You'll see prophecies fulfilled. A city full of people worshiping Jehovah. And a new temple, the most beautiful building on earth.
Again, huge emphasis on building. We need buildings. Jehovah demands that people build him real estate in order to worship him. He needs buildings in order for humans to have a relationship with him, apparently. And you also hear about this concept of a city full of people worshipping Jehovah. In other words, worship of Jehovah is mandatory. And we see this sort of played out in the Nehemiah drama and to an extent in the Josiah drama, although that's obviously supposed to be earlier in the story. But in the Nehemiah drama, it's brought out how fanatical the leadership is, to the point where they're mortified when children aren't speaking Hebrew, and the command is that the Jews should send out their foreign wives and their foreign children. In other words, families should be torn apart because the worship comes first. The worship must be pure in this effectively caliphate, in this religious state where there can be no plurality of belief, which is ironic when you consider that Jehovah's Witnesses rely on human rights laws saying that everyone has a right to believe as they choose. Jehovah's Witnesses rely on plurality of belief when it comes to arguing for their freedom of worship. But if they had it their way, I think it would be more like what's described here, a caliphate, a state where only one religion is allowed, and it's a religion that accepts the authority of the slave.
O Daniel, you very precious man, I have been sent to you. Do not be afraid, Daniel.
Your words have been heard from the first day you gave your heart to understanding and humbling yourself before your God. I have come to make you understand what will befall your people in the final part of the days.
I have no strength. There's no breath left in me.
Do not be afraid, O very precious man. May you have peace. Be strong. Be strong.
Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me.
I will tell you the things recorded in the writings of truth. Look, 3 more kings will stand up for Persia, and the 4th one will amass greater riches than all others.
Oh, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these things?
Happy is the one who keeps an expectation. Go on to the end. You will rest, but you will stand up for your lot at the end of the days.
And that brings us to the end of Daniel, A Lifetime of Faith, this year's Bible drama for Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going to be completely honest, I sort of enjoyed it, or I at least enjoyed parts of it. There have certainly been worse dramas than this in previous conventions. I'm even going to go out on a limb and say that this is the best Bible drama they've done so far. Not necessarily in terms of production, although the production was pretty good, at least in parts, but more in terms of not being quite as manipulative. You do have the hidden messages, as I have covered extensively in my rebuttal. You do have this obvious attempt to draw a parallel between Daniel's enemies and apostates, but it's possible to watch this and not draw that parallel in your mind. In other words, it's obviously been planted there by the governing body with that intention, with the intention of Jehovah's Witnesses thinking, oh yes, that's what apostates do. They are equally wicked and equally scheming and equally devious. But it's possible to watch the drama and think, well, this is just telling what happened in the Bible narrative. Obviously, the Bible narrative is false. As I've repeatedly argued and explained, we know that the book of Daniel is a forgery. Dr. Richard Carrier's article, which is linked below, gives us excellent reasons as to why this is the consensus of scholars. But I can enjoy this story whether it happened or not. I can enjoy it as a work of fiction, an ancient work of fiction that's being brought to life. Would I have liked to see better acting? Yes. Again, the guy who played elderly Daniel did a reasonable job, but he came unstuck. Certainly in that part where he's praying to God. Would I have liked to see the story of the golden statue in Daniel chapter 3 brought to life? Yes, I would. Would I have liked to see the story of Daniel in the lion's den given a bit more effort with actual lions? Yes, I would. But all in all, I think they did quite an impressive job, if I'm completely honest. I enjoyed the immense image depiction. I enjoyed the immense tree depiction. I'm glad that they didn't give any suggestion that the prophecy in Daniel chapter 4 actually had a grander meaning. It's quite interesting that they didn't include that. They literally just portrayed what was described in Daniel chapter 4. And I quite enjoyed the writing on the wall at Belshazzar's feast, even though, again, we know it wouldn't have been Belshazzar's feast. It was Nabonidus who was ruling Babylon when it was captured, not by the Medes, as foretold by Jeremiah, but by the Persians under Cyrus, and it would have been Cyrus and not Darius the Mede ruling over Babylon. But again, these are all issues that you can kind of overlook and sort of enjoy the drama on its own grounds, so long as you're not buying into these hidden messages too much, so long as you're not leaning on the Daniel narrative as further reason to follow the governing body, which, let's face it, is almost certainly the reason why they have put so much work and effort into producing this. Now, though, it's time for, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the final talk of the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention. Its title is Become Powerful by Your Faith, and it's going to be delivered by Stephen Lett.
A building constructed with steel-reinforced concrete can withstand powerful earthquakes. A tree with strong, deep roots can remain standing in the face of many powerful storms. An athlete made powerful by rigorous training can successfully complete a decathlon, a 10-event athletic contest. Well, just as a building, a tree, and an athlete can be powerful, we as Jehovah's people can be powerful by means of our faith. And we will discuss during this talk how faith, a product of Holy Spirit, the most powerful force in the universe, can reinforce, fortify us for any, and I mean any, test, trial, or temptation that comes our way. Now, even though we may not feel powerful physically or emotionally, our faith can make us powerful spiritually. And spiritual power is much more valuable than physical or emotional power. With spiritual power, we can be like Abraham. Please go to Romans chapter 4 and notice what was said about Abraham, beginning in verse number 18. Although beyond hope, yet based on hope, he had faith that he would become the father of many nations according to what had been said, so your offspring will be. And although he did not grow weak in faith, he considered his own body, now as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, as well as the deadness of the womb of Sarah. But because of the promise of God, he did not waver in a lack of faith, but he, notice, became powerful by his faith, giving God glory and being fully convinced that what he, Jehovah, had promised, he, Jehovah, was also able to do.
We're watching Stephen Lett conclude the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention with the theme, Become Powerful by Your Faith. And what is it with this apparent obsession with Abraham? Stephen Lett is now the 5th speaker in this 3-day convention to invoke Abraham as a model of faith.
Now, as an example, we think of Abraham.
Abraham.
He was quick to obey Jehovah, even when Jehovah asked him to do things that were very difficult, like leaving Ur and offering up his only son.
Abraham was a powerful example of proving his faith by obedience.
Please go to Romans chapter 4.
Of Abraham, Romans chapter 4 and verse 20 says, because of the promise of God, he did not waver in a lack of faith.
About Abraham, Romans 4:20 says, but because of the promise of God, he did not waver in a lack of faith.
But because of the promise of God, he did not waver in a lack of faith.
So yes, now 5 different speakers, all pointing to Abraham: Mark Sanderson, Joel Dellinger, or Mini-Let as I like to call him, Gerrit Loesch, John Ekron, and Stephen Lett, all apparently wanting to remind Jehovah's Witnesses of the need to have faith like Abraham, a man who was willing to kill his son because of voices in his head. And of these 5 speakers, all talking about Abraham, 3 of them all used the same verse, Romans 4 verse 20, Joel Dellinger, Gerrit Loesch, and Stephen Lett. Where is the organization here? Where is the coordination? You would think they would be getting their heads together at some point and doing some sort of continuity check and just making sure they're not treading on each other's toes by repeatedly using the same verse with the same application. But apparently there is no coordination on this year's convention program. I mean, I don't know, you'd have to ask them, but it's almost as though the speakers have just been given their themes and a few suggested verses that the convention wants to highlight, and they've just gone away and researched their talks and all chosen the same verses to bring out. I don't know what's causing this. All I know is that it's repetition. How can you call this spiritual food guided by the Holy Spirit when they're making the same points over and over again, reading the same scriptures with the same application? And why is Abraham such a worthy role model for Jehovah's Witnesses? Could it be that it's because his story shows that children are expendable or family members are expendable? You can understand why the story of Abraham would be an appealing narrative to a religious leadership that literally demands that families get ripped apart on ideological grounds.
How does the Bible build faith in God's existence? Well, for one thing, within its pages, it gives us common sense reasoning scriptures such as Hebrews 3:4. And you know what that says? It says, of course, every house is constructed by someone, but the one who constructed all things is God. Now, you could never convince any sane person that a beautiful house designed and built itself. Even more so, it should not be possible to convince any rational person that all the beautiful creations around us just designed and built themselves, or that they're the product of blind chance. Where there is design, there is always a designer. Now let's illustrate this. How many times would you have to throw black paint from a can into a white ceiling until you produced a perfect map of New York City? Until the paint particles scattered accurately, identifying all of the streets, the highways, the tunnels, the bridges, the overpasses, and the landmarks, and correctly named each one. Well, you could do that for billions of times, and never would you produce a perfect map of New York City. Now, to add a little humor, let's say you tried doing this 100 billion years, and you get excited. You finally got a city map. But oh no, it's not New York City. It's Warwick, New York. Now you got to start all over going for that map of New York City. I had to give you a little humor. But think of this. One living human cell is much more complex, intricately designed than a map of New York City. And one human body is made up of about 100 trillion of such amazing cells, all working together harmoniously.
Stephen Lett there using the final talk of the Powerful by Faith convention to showcase his stand-up skills and, frankly, showcase his ignorance. What the hell was that?
It should not be possible to convince any rational person that all the beautiful creations around us just designed and built themselves, or that they're the product of blind chance. Where there is design, there is always a designer.
This is what's called arguing from ignorance. Stephen Lett can't conceive of how life could come about without an intelligent designer, conveniently an intelligent designer that believes he should be one of 8 mouthpieces on the earth, part of his channel with mankind. Isn't that convenient? Not just any God, not just any intelligent designer, but a God who values him as a leader of his people. Stephen Lett can't conceive of how life can come about through natural means, and he's therefore straw-manning the atheist or the evolutionist position. Scientists do not say that living organisms designed and built themselves. There are extremely complex and sophisticated processes that have caused organisms as we know them today to come about. They haven't just popped into existence someday, which, if you think about it, is the creationist position. The creationist position is that you go from, say, no giraffes 1 second to giraffes the next second. In other words, giraffes suddenly explode into existence. The only difference is that they say God did this. God did it seems to be their excuse for everything, but that is not what scientists say. Scientists do not say that you go from 1 second without giraffes to the next second there are giraffes. Scientists give credible, logical reasons, a logical process that helps us understand where giraffes come from, where all living organisms come from. They certainly don't say that giraffes or any other living organism designed themselves. Stephen Lett goes on to further strawman the position of science by saying,
or that they're the product of blind chance.
Evolution is not chance. Evolution by natural selection is not blind chance. It's not blind chance when the environment is dictating how an organism develops. When the environment is selecting organisms based on their ability to survive in that environment, thus dictating which organisms flourish and which organisms die off, what you have is not blind chance, it's cause and effect. Then we have this preposterous paint analogy, which is supposed to be in some way comparable to what science teaches about the origins of the human cell. Stephen Lett says,
but think of this. One living human cell is much more complex, intricately designed than a map of New York City.
This is not what science teaches about the origins of the human cell. What is this? I mean, what does it say about Stephen Lett if he has to strawman the other side, if he has to mislead people about what science teaches? Science does not teach that human cells just popped into existence. Again, if you think about it, that's the creationist position. It's creationists who say that you go from no human cells 1 second to fully formed human cells the next second. Evolution by natural selection is the opposite of that. Evolution by natural selection says if a human cell needs to be this way in order for the human body to work, in order for humans to be able to live long enough to procreate, then given enough time, given enough adaptations, this is what a human cell is going to look like. The process by which science says we arrived at a human cell looks nothing like the way Stephen Lett describes. It's nothing like throwing paint at a wall or a ceiling. So why does he have to mislead people like this? If Stephen Lett is so certain that he has the correct understanding of how the human cell came to be, why does he need to misrepresent scientists? Why can't he be honest and say, this is how scientists believe the human cell evolved? Frankly, I think we all know why he can't be honest. Partly because he wants to trick and manipulate people, And partly because, quite frankly, I don't think Stephen Lett is bright enough to understand how evolution works.
How does the Bible build faith in itself? That it is the Word of God. Well, for one thing, everything the Bible recommends works, brings superior results. How to raise children, how to have a happy marriage, and so forth. Think about it. Humans simply aren't smart enough to recommend only what works. And their advice is constantly being revised and updated, isn't it? Though written hundreds, thousands of years ago, the Bible has never needed to be revised, yet everything it recommends works. It has to be from a higher source than humans. How does the Bible build faith in God's moral standards? Well, it tells us what they are. It encourages us to obey them. And when we do, it protects us physically, emotionally, spiritually. We get happiness, we get a good conscience, we experience the benefits. Thus, we don't have to learn the painful process of trial and error. There's a saying that experience is the best teacher. Completely wrong. Experience is the school of hard knocks. Jehovah is the best teacher. Jehovah is making the inexperienced one wise, according to Psalm 19:7.
So, according to Stephen Lett, the Bible is always right. Well, I would take issue with that. I think there are many examples of the Bible being wrong, of the Bible advising very questionable morals and ethics. But even if we were to grant Stephen Lett's proposition that the Bible is right, that the Bible has wisdom, that doesn't get us to Jehovah's Witnesses being God's one true religion. All he's doing is establishing the Bible to be a moral authority. He's not explaining how he gets to be a spokesperson for God, which is routinely what we run into whenever the governing body or their helpers are trying to press home the Bible's authenticity. All they're doing is supporting the Bible. They're not explaining in any way, shape, or form why Jehovah's Witnesses are unique in being able to interpret the Bible for us. But this part about the Bible always being right, I find very dubious. Stephen Lett says,
think about it. Humans simply aren't smart enough to recommend only what works. And their advice is constantly being revised and updated, isn't it? Though written hundreds, thousands of years ago, the Bible has never needed to be revised, yet everything it recommends works.
Everything it recommends works. The Bible has never needed to be revised. Okay, well, what about the Bible's endorsement of genocide on religious grounds? What about Joshua and the Israelites going on a genocidal rampage when they reached the Promised Land? Well, what about the Bible condoning slavery? What about the many scriptures in the Bible that demean women? What about the Bible condemning gay people to death, as it does at Leviticus 20, verse 13? How is this something that works? Oh, this advice always works. If we were to live in a society where gay people were condemned to death, that society would work. Would it really, Stephen Lett? How about a society where the killing of babies is deemed just, as happened when David committed his adultery with Bathsheba, and it was decided that as part of the penalty, the baby should die? I don't want to live in a society where killing babies is ever the answer to anything, period. But that's apparently advice that works, or a judicial decision that works. What about the genocide in the Bible? What about Joshua and the Israelites invading the Promised Land and killing entire nations? How is this something that works? Look, I understand if you hold a candle for the Bible being God's inspired word. I'm personally an atheist. and I find many things described in the Bible to be utterly despicable, but I can remember what it feels like to take the Bible seriously and to be able to excuse all of these awful examples of terrible morals seemingly coming from God. I would mentally sweep those to one side and think, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe God knows better. It was a different time back then. There are any number of excuses you can make. But let's be clear, the Bible, or the advice contained in the Bible, definitely doesn't work and definitely isn't up to date and never in need of revision. And am I the only one who found Stephen Lett more than a bit manipulative when he was dismissing the entire concept of learning from experience? He said,
"There's a saying that experience is the best teacher." Completely wrong. Experience is the school of hard knocks. Jehovah is the best teacher. Jehovah is making the inexperienced one wise, according to Psalm 19:7.
What he's effectively saying there is don't rely on yourselves, don't rely on your ability to learn from experience, rely on us. Let Jehovah teach you, meaning let Jehovah's organization teach you, meaning let the faithful slave teach you, meaning let Stephen Lett and his pals tell you everything you need to know.
How does the Bible build faith in God's love for us? The most powerful way, it explains how Jehovah gave his firstborn son to die for us so that we could have everlasting life. Now think about it. What do most people give away if they give something away? Something they don't need, or at least something they can do without. But Jehovah gave at great cost, great pain to himself. Evolution teaches that our ancestors were apes. How could we feel happy and feel loved thinking that an ape was our father? But our real father, Jehovah, is the personification of love.
Stephen Lett there giving us yet another sampling of his intellectual prowess. In this case, by giving us yet another appeal to ignorance. I, Stephen Lett, don't know how humans descended from apes, therefore it's preposterous. And thrown in just for good measure, an appeal to emotion. How does it feel, ladies and gentlemen? How does it feel to have as your parent, not what science teaches, how does it feel to have as your parent an ape? How unsatisfying that must be. Therefore, it must be wrong. The universe and the natural world doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about how you feel about the fact that you haven't just descended from apes, but you are an ape. That's just how things are. If you go on Wikipedia and look up humans or Homo sapiens, you will find that humans are classed as hominids, and hominids are great apes. You didn't just descend from apes. You didn't just have an ape as your parent. You are scientifically an ape. Granted, it may be less obvious with most of us than it is with Stephen Lett, but those are just the facts. Human beings evolved. We share kinship with the animal kingdom. We didn't descend from chimpanzees and gorillas, but we are related to chimpanzees and gorillas, and this can be proven by looking at the DNA. We share 98.8% of our DNA with chimpanzees for a reason. Again, it doesn't surprise me that Stephen Lett can't wrap his tiny brain around these scientific facts, but he's not offering us any persuasive reasons to embrace his backwards views with these cheap arguments from ignorance and appeals to emotion.
But now, Friday afternoon, we had our second symposium, which opened the book of creation. And peering into this book can empower our faith. First, let's talk about the first talk that dealt with the stars. Isaiah 40, verse 26, tells us that Jehovah created all of them, and he calls all of them by name. Now let's ponder this for a moment. How long would it take you to name just the stars in the Milky Way galaxy if you named one every second? Joseph, Paul, Rachel, Sarah. Well, scientists estimate there are perhaps 400 billion stars just in the Milky Way galaxy. So if you named one a second, it would take you 400 billion seconds. Now, how long is that? 12,684 years. More than twice the time that has passed since the creation of Adam.
So I've included this clip because this is where we get Stephen Lett's alternative to human evolution, which he's just been disparaging. Obviously, I've already commented on Isaiah 40 verse 26. Stephen Lett is missing out the part where it says not one of them is missing. This is a scientific inaccuracy because we've learned, of course, that stars do go missing, stars do die out, they go supernova. The Bible writers clearly didn't know this, or they would have alluded to it. They certainly wouldn't have said something about stars that is factually untrue. But Stephen Lett is here obsessing about this whole notion of naming the stars and how many years it would take you to do this just for the Milky Way galaxy. He says,
so if you named one a second, it would take you 400 billion seconds. Now, how long is that? 12,684 years. More than twice the time that has passed since the creation of Adam.
More than twice the time that has passed since the creation of Adam. How many years was that? 12,684 years. So divide that by 2, you get 6,342. So what Stephen Lett is saying is that humans have only been around for about 6,000 years. That is the creationist position. If you go back in time, more than 6,000 years, there were no humans. I think most people watching this, including most believers watching this, will find it difficult to swallow that if you go back in time, only just over 6,000 years, no humans. So that if you'd gone in a time machine to the Garden of Eden and you'd arrived on the right day, you'd be able to see from thin air Adam suddenly materialize, or from the dust, or however it was supposed to be. It's obviously preposterous, but that's the sort of backward teaching that creationists like Jehovah's Witnesses have to believe. In fact, it's in the All Scripture is Inspired of God and Beneficial book, which dates from the 60s, but we used to carry this with us to the meetings all the time. It's still available on the website, at least on the Watchtower Online Library. This book has a timeline in it of all the Bible dates. And if you look at the first Bible date that it gives, it's 4026 BCE, the creation of Adam. So earlier than 4026 BCE, namely 4027 BCE, no humans. And then 4026 BCE, on a certain day, boom, humans pop into existence. So Stephen Lett can laugh all he likes about apes, even though humans are apes. We are literally hominids, or great apes. He can be dismissive of that all he likes, but his alternative belief is far from compelling.
But now we ask, will Jehovah answer our pleas for more faith? Most definitely he will. And one outstanding way he has done this is by providing us with Bible prophecy. Prophecies in the book of Daniel alone have helped millions to build rock-solid faith. For example, the fulfilled prophecies regarding the king of the north and the king of the south have been very faith-strengthening. In fact, let's review the video on this topic that appeared in Brother Kenneth Cook's May broadcast. Enjoy this powerful video.
Daniel received a prophecy about the coming of two rivals, the king of the north and the king of the south. How has it been fulfilled? In the late 1800s, the German Empire became the king of the north. That government brought its power and heart against the king of the south with a large army. Today, Russian authorities continue to attack true worship. We expect such persecution, but we also expect it to end. Our King, Jesus Christ, is more powerful than any human government. Soon he will destroy not only the kings of the north and the south, but all of his enemies. And he will deliver God's loyal people.
What a powerful video. Has the unerring accuracy of those prophecies strengthened your faith? We're confident that it has. And we're absolutely convinced that the rest of that prophecy, including our deliverance, will be fulfilled. Christ soon will defend God's people and bring an end to this entire wicked system.
What we've just had in the final talk of the Powerful by Faith convention, being given here by Stephen Lett, is regurgitated spiritual food. As Stephen Lett himself acknowledges, there's nothing new here. This video about the King of the North and the King of the South was actually part of the May 2021 JW Broadcasting episode by Kenneth Cook. Why do we need to see it twice? Why are they presenting it on the convention all over again rather than simply leaving it to Jehovah's Witnesses to decide for themselves whether this is impactful, whether this is meaningful? Because it's already been made available to them. It's on the website. Why do we need to see it again? I guess it would be one thing if the material were helpful, were relevant, were factual, but it's just propaganda. It's just trying to push this narrative of Jehovah's Witnesses being at the center of Bible prophecy. And actually, now that we are seeing it again, we can see things in a little more perspective, because at the beginning of the video, maybe Tibor can overlay if he is gracious. At the beginning of the video, we see the end of the Daniel drama where Kenny Rogers visits Daniel on the banks of the Tigris. Isn't it interesting how all angels and, in fact, Jesus all look like Kenny Rogers? It's just a male-only affair in heaven, and not just males, but also males with this white hair and white beard combination. Anyway, that's apparently the standard issue angel look. So Kenny Rogers visits Daniel, all of these hundreds, thousands of years ago, to give him information about Jehovah's Witnesses being persecuted. That's what you have to believe. And bear in mind the period of history that's supposedly covered by the King of the North, King of the South prophecy should include the Second World War. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. In actual fact, as I've already explained in my video rebuttal, and the sushi will be here if Tibor is again gracious, as I've already explained, the King of the North, King of the South prophecy doesn't go any further than the Seleucid Ptolemaic period. That's when the writer is talking about. In fact, that's how we can date the book of Daniel, because it gets more and more accurate as the writer is talking about events of his time, whereas when he's talking about past events in Babylonian Persian history, he gets it wrong time and time again, as we've already seen, doesn't get it right about the Medes and Persians capturing Babylon, doesn't get it right about Darius the Mede existing and being the first king of Babylon following the Mede and Persian conquest. But they do start to get it right with interesting detail when it gets to this period, which is sort of covered by the book of Maccabees, the Maccabean period, when there was this Jewish uprising against the rule of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. That's when the book of Daniel starts to make sense. Daniel certainly isn't talking about anything beyond that period with any accuracy, and Daniel sure as hell isn't talking about the events of the 20th and 21st century. And if you think about this for a moment, if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses watching this, just imagine you are an angel sent to speak to the Jewish prophet Daniel on the banks of the Tigris, and you're tasked with giving Daniel information about the future related to his people. How would you skip the Holocaust? How would the murder of 6 million Jews not be relevant to Jewish prophet Daniel? How would you instead focus on the history of Jehovah's Witnesses and the periods in their history when they were persecuted or not persecuted? How would you fixate on one country, Russia, as being the king of the north because it's banned Jehovah's Witnesses, even though there are many other countries that have done the same thing? In the case of Malawi, not just banning Jehovah's Witnesses, but brutalizing them, subjecting them to the most inhumane treatment. How would you, as an angel relaying history in advance to Daniel, get it so back to front? Have such terrible priorities in what constitutes important information, so that the Holocaust isn't really worth mentioning. But Russia persecuting Jehovah's Witnesses and banning them, that's important. That needs to be in the information that I'm going to give the prophet Daniel. None of it makes the slightest sense. And if I were a believing Jehovah's Witness watching this convention, I would be thinking, why are we seeing this all over again? Don't I get to decide for myself whether I watch the May 2021 broadcast and how much I watch it? I've come to the convention, or I've downloaded the convention expecting to see new material. Why does my spiritual food have to be regurgitated, essentially some kind of ready meal that Stephen Lett's throwing back in the microwave and reheating?
The talk put up a hard fight for the faith, reminded us that, as is true in all fights, in our fight, we have enemies. For one thing, we must reject apostate lies and the false stories of other opposers, which are designed to sow doubt and weaken faith. Satan is very skilled at using innuendo, half-truths, and lies. So it's not surprising that the news media, which is often manipulated by apostates, clergymen, and other opposers, likewise often employs innuendo, half-truths, and lies against Jehovah's organization. Think about this. Faith is a product of Holy Spirit It's a provision from Jehovah to strengthen us, whereas doubt is a tool of the devil designed to weaken us. Do you recall how Satan approached Eve? Is it really so that God said, "You must not eat from every tree of the garden"? Is that really so? Why did he present it that way? To plant doubt and shipwreck her faith. And he succeeded. Well, likewise, if we're not careful, doubt can shipwreck our faith. But strong faith keeps doubt out of our hearts and minds.
So here we're being treated to a 3.5-minute reprise of David Splain's 34-minute apostate rant from the Saturday afternoon of the convention. Stephen Lett wants in on the action. He's adding his own 2 cents, and in so doing, he just cannot help but show how culty this organization is.
Faith is a product of the Holy Spirit. It's a provision from Jehovah to strengthen us, whereas doubt is a tool of the devil designed to weaken us.
Yes, if you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness with doubts, how dare you? You need to get rid of those doubts, because doubt is a tool of the devil designed to weaken you. If you harbor doubts, you are letting Satan weaken you. You need to instead just believe everything. Just believe everything, so long as it comes from the governing body. You're not allowed to believe anything you hear that's critical of Jehovah's Witnesses. And isn't that the gist? Isn't that the entire message, both of what Stephen Lett's saying here and of David Splain's talk? You're only allowed to trust us. You have to automatically dismiss as lies anything that's critical of the organization. And just as David Splain refused to give a single example of what these lies are, so that Jehovah's Witnesses can reach their own conclusions as to whether they actually are lies or not, Stephen Lett's following the same playbook. He's refusing to give a single example, and this is an insult. This is insulting the intelligence of his audience. If he really respected his audience, if he really esteemed his audience and dignified them with the ability to figure things out for themselves, he would give us at least one example of an apostate lie, any example, and he would demonstrate how it's a lie. But he's not going to do that, is he? Because it turns out that apostates are right, and both Stephen Lett and David Splain know this. They know that if Jehovah's Witnesses look behind the curtain, once they've realized that they're being lied to and manipulated, this will result in shipwreck.
If we're not careful, doubt can shipwreck our faith.
If you're in the wrong faith, if your faith is wrong, if your religion is false, maybe your faith needs to be shipwrecked. Maybe it needs to be destroyed so that you can start anew, so that you can find out what the truth is. Why should you continue believing lies just for the sake of it? And how can you find out whether it's really the truth or not, whether you're being lied to, if you follow Stephen Lett and David Splain's advice and never listen to any criticism of your beliefs?
But now, talking just a little bit more about apostates, what if an apostate knocked at your front door and said, "I'd like to come into your home, I'd like to sit down with you, and I'd like to teach you some apostate ideas"? Well, you would immediately get rid of him, wouldn't you? You would send him down the highway. But now think of this. What if that same apostate tries to come into your home by means of the television or computer? Well, hopefully, we reject him just as decisively. 2 John 10 says, "If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, never receive him into your home. That would mean not through the front door, not through the television or computer. Sadly, though, some have reasoned, foolishly, if I listen to this apostate on television or the computer, or perhaps read his book, I'll recognize how wrong he is. It'll build up my faith. And if I ever encounter this teaching in the ministry, I'll better be able to refute it. Well, that is foolish thinking indeed. That would be like reasoning, if I eat stinky, rotten food from a garbage can, it'll really help me in the future to recognize bad food. Not very good reasoning, is it? Rather than feed our minds poison apostate ideas, we read God's Word daily and strengthen and safeguard our faith.
Yes, apparently if you encounter an apostate, you need to send him down the highway.
Well, you would immediately get rid of him, wouldn't you? You would send him down the highway.
Oh no, not the highway. The highway of shame. I'm being sent away because I'm an apostate and no one should listen to my ideas. This man is terrified, isn't he? You can smell the desperation on Stephen Lett, just as you could with David Splain. These guys have been rumbled, haven't they? They are terrified that this house of cards is falling down. This elaborate illusion is so easily being untangled by anyone going online and listening to what apostates have to say. It's interesting that Stephen Lett identifies television, videos, and books, was it?
Sadly, though, some have reasoned, foolishly, if I listen to this apostate on television or the computer, or perhaps read his book, I'll recognize how wrong he is. It'll build up my faith.
I'm going to be honest, part of me really wants him to be talking about me because I obviously have videos that you can play on the computer, and I have a book that Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to read. But what he's referring to, obviously, is the win-win scenario that I often refer to on my channel. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're confronted with information that's critical of your beliefs, it's a win-win scenario for you to look at these criticisms, because either you will realize that these criticisms aren't valid, that the arguments are flawed, and that therefore your faith is valid and your faith will be stronger than ever, or you'll learn that the criticisms are valid, that the arguments against your faith are fair and reasonable, and you'll have the ability to do something about it. You'll have the freedom to leave this false religion behind. And Stephen Lett's best answer to this win-win scenario is, yes, but it's rotten food. And you wouldn't want to eat rotten food, would you?
Well, that is foolish thinking indeed. That would be like reasoning, if I eat stinky, rotten food from a garbage can, it'll really help me in the future to recognize bad food. Not very good reasoning, is it?
As stupid as this is, I actually prefer this to David Splain's answer, because David Splain's answer was to say, well, you wouldn't drink poison, would you? And obviously with poison, the thing about poison is that you can't necessarily tell what is or isn't poison. I mean, obviously, if it has on the bottle poison, you know it's poison. But typically when someone's trying to poison you, they will put it in your drink or put it in your food, and it will be hard to know for sure whether it's poison or not. By using this analogy, Stephen Lett is comparing apostate information to something where you can easily identify whether it's harmful or detrimental or not. Because if food really is stinky and rotten and from a garbage can, you'll be able to decide this for yourself, won't you? There'll be some evidence to suggest that it's rotten. You know, the bad smell will be obvious. You'll be able to see that it's come from a garbage can. And yes, no one in their right mind, hopefully, would eat food like that. but you're basing this judgment on things that can be verified. You can verify the fact, usually, that the food is rotten. You can verify the fact that it's stinky, and you can verify the fact that it's come from a garbage can. By contrast, how are you supposed to verify that apostates are lying if you're not listening to their arguments? If you won't even entertain the basic premise of the apostate's argument, if you're putting your hands over your ears and saying, la, 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 I can't hear you, if you're burying your head in the sand and just refusing to know anything about what their argument actually is, how can you know whether it's rotten? How can you know whether it's stinky? How can you know that it isn't actually delicious, nutritious food for the purposes of this analogy? So what Stephen Lett's done, because he's a bit dim, is replace David Splain's analogy, where there's poison, which you can't test, with his own analogy, comparing apostate information to rotten food, thus weakening the analogy, because how are you supposed to tell whether food is rotten if you're unwilling to look at it? Quite honestly, as I said in my response to David Splain's talk, I am rubbing my hands at all of this ranting against apostates and against the media. Yes, it's frustrating to see my side insulted and subjected to all of this ad hominem and compared to rotten food and compared to poison. You know, they can throw all of these insults as far as I'm concerned, but for me it's delicious that they are desperate enough to do that, that they are so threatened by what apostates are saying and doing. The collective activism of the ex-Jehovah's Witness community is having such a huge impact on the organization that they're seeing because they can see the numbers. It's delicious for me that all of this effort is causing them to be so paranoid and so visibly desperate. The more they jump up and down telling Jehovah's Witnesses, don't look behind the curtain, the more Jehovah's Witnesses are going to want to do precisely that.
Please watch the following dramatization that depicts a brother who faces the threat of being arrested, but by reflecting on Daniel's example, he is helped to continue serving Jehovah with constancy in the face of this intimidating circumstance.
It's still chaos in many parts of the city, with armed soldiers detaining and arresting those not pledging support of the new government.
Are we still going to the meeting tonight?
I wanted to do what was best for my wife and daughter. But a few of the elders have already been arrested. What if I was arrested? What would happen to my family?
You're not going home to pray, are you?
I pray at my window 3 times a day, every day. If I even appeared to compromise, what would they think? I know Jehovah, and if I trust him, he'll reward me. I don't know how, but he will. Pray that I keep my faith, that we all keep our faith, no matter how this ends.
So we have here in the concluding talk of the Powerful by Faith convention yet another persecution-based drama. We've had a number of them, actually, in this convention. It seems to be a recurring theme in these conventions in general to depict the Great Tribulation. In this particular convention, we've had dramatization after dramatization set in this supposedly future period that Jehovah's Witnesses can look forward to, where the authorities turn on them. And in this particular situation, a guy is worried about his family, about his wife and daughter. And incidentally, I'm not that convinced by the casting, because when you look at the two ladies, they look sort of comparable age. You'd be forgiven for thinking this wasn't some kind of polyamorous situation. I'm not buying the fact that one of those is the wife and one of those is the daughter. Poor casting, if you ask me, from the audio visual services department. But that aside, all of this is intended to stoke paranoia among Jehovah's Witnesses, to depict this future period when they're going to be rounded up by the authorities. And the message in this dramatization is, have faith like Daniel. I commented during the Daniel drama that there were hidden messages there that seemed to be alluding to this persecution narrative among Jehovah's Witnesses, especially the part of the drama where Daniel is arrested for praying. Sure enough, within an hour or so, we get precisely this message drilled home. This was, it turns out, the intended message for that part of the drama. Just as Daniel was picked on, just as Daniel was framed, was pursued by his enemies, was persecuted for persisting with his worship, Jehovah's Witnesses can apparently expect the same thing to happen during the Great Tribulation.
The scriptures are clear. We must continue to meet together, even in small groups if necessary. Let's just pray that whatever happens, we have the strength to endure it. Dear Jehovah God, please. Eventually, I was arrested.
We miss you so much, but we're very proud of you. We know whatever the outcome of your trial, you'll maintain your faith, and so will we.
Are you scared?
I was very scared. But Jehovah helps us when we're scared.
I knew I would be okay, and that Jehovah would take care of my family.
As was true of the brother in our video, we will be persecuted. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, all those desiring to live with godly devotion in association with Christ Jesus will also be persecuted. It didn't say maybe, good chance, probably. Will be persecuted. Guaranteed. But like our brother in the video, when persecuted, let's reflect on Daniel's example, and let's fight for our faith, and let's pray confident that our God is always mightier than our enemies.
And there you have, in summary, the entire reason for fixating on stories of persecution, both real and fictitious. This is obviously a fictitious story, but the organization will also show heart-tugging testimonials from Russia and other places where Jehovah's Witnesses are being persecuted in the here and now. The governing body, people like Stephen Lett, need these stories, need these narratives for the religion to make sense, because Jehovah's Witnesses have been indoctrinated to believe that persecution is evidence that theirs is the true religion.
2 Timothy 3:12 says, all those desiring to live with godly devotion in association with Christ Jesus will also be persecuted. It didn't say maybe, good chance, probably. Will be persecuted. guaranteed.
That's the whole reason why persecution is such a big deal for this religion, to the extent where they invoke Bible prophecy. They point to the King of the North, King of the South prophecy in Daniel and say, oh, this is prophesying our persecution. This is prophesying the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses. We need to be persecuted because it says so in the Bible that Christ's followers will be persecuted. So in this dramatization, we see in a nutshell why the organization features persecution, both real and fictitious, so prominently in its propaganda. But it's just interesting for me, as this particular dramatization unfolds, you see little clues at how controlling this organization is. You'll notice where the guy says,
we must continue to meet together, even in small groups if necessary.
We must continue to meet together, even in small groups if necessary. This is just something you need to do, even if it means you'll get arrested. Christian faith isn't something that you can cultivate personally. You've got to do it with other Jehovah's Witnesses. You've got to do it in precisely the way that the organization mandates, even if it means risking arrest. And what's interesting is that this particular dramatization is revisited later on in the concluding music video. And I'm going to show you part of that music video that doesn't make the cut in my final edit, because basically I don't want my audience sitting through the entire music video because it's quite triggering. So I plucked this particular part out from what I'm going to show later, but I'm going to show it now because basically we're going to see this whole situation revisited.
With eyes of faith, there's nothing more to fear. With Jehovah, I am strong, determined to go on, knowing that my God is always near. With eyes of faith.
So hopefully you noticed there that following the guy's arrest, his wife and daughter, who again look suspiciously the same age, they continue worshipping, and you get them having this covert meeting where there are no brothers, where there are no male Jehovah's Witnesses, I should say. And because there are no males around, as you'll see in the video itself, which Tibor is hopefully overlaying at this precise point, one of them is wearing a head covering, presumably the mother, as she takes this covert meeting that's going ahead secretly so that the authorities aren't aware. So inadvertently, in this video about persecution, in this video that's intended to remind Jehovah's Witnesses that they are special, they are unique, they're uniquely being persecuted, and this persecution is going to intensify during the Great Tribulation, incidentally, they cannot help but weave in this detail, which should be a good clue, especially if you're watching this as a woman who isn't a Jehovah's Witness, who's perhaps just interested in what the religion is all about. Maybe you're wondering whether this is a religion that you could get involved in. Well, this is the view it takes of women. If you're a woman in this organization, you're not allowed to teach. You don't get a voice. And if through necessity meetings must continue, even though there are no men around to do the teaching, you need to show your subjection to men as someone who has to do the teaching by wearing a head covering. So I love the fact that they've included this small detail, which is a strong hint at how sexist and misogynist this organization really is.
Please watch the following dramatization in which an older brother who feels helpless reflects on how the angel reassured Daniel.
It all went by so quickly. Pioneering, foreign language, circuit work. There was even a time that I was the one encouraging older ones. I miss those days so much. But now, I am the one in a nursing home. Sometimes I feel like I have nothing left to offer.
O Daniel, you very precious man, I have been sent to you. Do not be afraid, Daniel. Your words have been heard from the first day you gave your heart to understanding.
I have no strength. There's no breath left in me.
Do not be afraid, O very precious man. May you have peace. Be strong. Be strong. Happy is the one who keeps an expectation. Go on to the end. You will rest, but you will stand up for your lot at the end of the days.
Hey, just checking on you. Do you have a minute? There's something I've been wanting to share with you. Okay, sure.
Yes, Jehovah does remember me, and I still have much to offer.
That was a very touching video indeed.
If you say so, Stephen. Well, before I launch into my rebuttal of this particular dramatization, I first of all need to acknowledge that I made a mistake. Back in May, I did a live stream rebuttal to a leaked music video, which is actually the music video that will be shown at the end of this session, the With Eyes of Faith rousing musical finale, which features footage from this dramatization. And during the live stream, for which I was joined by my co-host Mark O'Donnell, I speculated as to what this particular dramatization was about, based purely on the visuals, and I said the following. I think that the younger Asian lad who we see in Paradise, who has the hat on, I think that's supposed to be him resurrected in the future. So in other words, again, I haven't seen this. I'm just piecing this together. You can bet, can't you, that this guy dies refusing blood, and they depict him being resurrected in the future as the chap with the hat. That's fair, isn't it?
I think it is.
We shall see, yeah. Obviously, I was way off there. It turns out this isn't a hospital, it's a nursing home. And the person he's speaking to is not his doctor, it's his carer. And there is no reference to the blood issue in this dramatization, for which I'm actually very grateful. Thinking about it, I should have known better, because they tend to shy away from the whole blood issue when they're doing these dramatizations. We have had, for example, the 2016 Sergei video, I think it was, which very strongly alluded to the blood issue. We also had, of course, the story of Jared Scepter, which was not a dramatization, it was a testimonial. That was in a JW Broadcasting episode, and I did a rebuttal to it here. Here's a thumbnail if Tibor is gracious. Aside from that, we haven't really had anything on the blood issue, probably because the organization realizes that this is dangerous ground for them to be covering. There will be Jehovah's Witnesses in the audience who have lost loved ones due to this issue, and it won't play very well if they're using the blood issue or depicting deaths from refusal of blood in their dramatizations. So they're playing it safe here, and kudos to them for doing that. This is just purely about an older Jehovah's Witness in a nursing home, nothing to do with blood. He's simply looking back on his life as a Jehovah's Witness. He's feeling a bit helpless, but then reminding himself that there are still ways that he can be useful. And apparently the way he can be useful is to try indoctrinating those around him. In this case, the carer. I struggle to understand how Jehovah's Witnesses do this. Apparently, it's an effective teaching method to pull someone into your room in this situation who's not a Jehovah's Witness and force them to watch video propaganda. Apparently, that's effective. I mean, you tell me, Jehovah's Witnesses who are watching this, whether this actually works or not. I never had to do this when I was a Jehovah's Witness, because I was a Jehovah's Witness before the whole JW broadcasting era. I just find it a really odd thing to do. Even if it's a good video, even if it's an interesting video, even if it's a non-manipulative video, I would always struggle to try forcing a total stranger to watch something on my tablet or phone. But apparently this is the sort of thing Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to do.
Well, what good things do we expect from Jehovah if we maintain strong faith? Let's talk about some of the events that we expect to unfold in the near future. Now, for one thing, the final part of Nebuchadnezzar's image dream, discussed in Daniel chapter 2, will be fulfilled. As represented by the four upper parts of that image, four world powers have come and gone just as prophesied. Today, the Anglo-American world power, symbolized by the feet of iron and clay, is dominating. And more than ever, we see this last world power living up to being a non-cohesive mixture of iron and clay. And just as iron mixed with clay is weaker than solid iron, so too, the Anglo-American world power is weaker than the iron-like Roman Empire from which it emerged. The ability of the Anglo-American world power to act with iron-like strength is weakened by clay-like elements, such as people rising up to claim their rights through insurrection, civil rights campaigns, and independence movements. And interestingly, in Daniel chapter 2, verse 34, it tells us that the stone, God's kingdom, will strike the image representing human governments in the feet of iron and clay, clearly identifying that Armageddon will come during the time of the American Anglo world power, the final human world power. And like Daniel, we have strong faith in the last sentence of verse 45, which says the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. There's no doubt about it. God's kingdom will destroy all human governments at Armageddon during the time of the Anglo-American world power.
We're nearing the end of Stephen Lett's talk, the concluding talk of the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention. And as you can see here, Stephen Lett is babbling on about the Anglo-American world power. If you're watching this as someone who's never been a Jehovah's Witness, you might be thinking, what on earth is the Anglo-American world power? Well, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that it's a thing, that the United States and Britain form a dual world power, which they clearly don't. I mean, I'm speaking as a British person. There is, I suppose, the special relationship, but it's not like there's this government made up of Britain and America and they decide on things together. For as long as I can remember, it's been a case of the United States pretty much doing whatever it wants on the world stage and the UK just deciding whether it wants to be involved or not. It didn't want to be involved in Vietnam. The UK didn't fight alongside the United States in Vietnam. It did want to be involved in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan. So how you can call it one world power or one empire is completely beyond me. But this is how Jehovah's Witnesses have been indoctrinated to think of essentially the history of our world. Apparently the list of empires goes Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, Anglo-America, that's it. There are no world empires that are worth talking about in terms of Bible prophecy. And the fact that Anglo-America is in ascendancy today, which again is questionable, is evidence that we're nearing Armageddon, because at the bottom of the statue that we saw depicted in the Daniel drama, the feet are a mix of iron and clay. And isn't it interesting what Stephen Lett has to say about the feet?
The ability of the Anglo-American world power to act with iron-like strength is weakened by clay-like elements, such as people rising up to claim their rights through insurrection, civil rights campaigns, and independence movements.
What he's describing, if you think about it, is democracy. All of those things you would expect in a modern democratic state where people have freedom of speech, where people are free to protest, and yes, protest their civil rights. Apparently it's a weakness, according to Stephen Lett, that people protest their rights, that people protest equality. It must be a weak country, a weak world power, if people are allowed to do that. Bear in mind, these are rights that Jehovah's Witnesses benefit from. Jehovah's Witnesses need there to be civil rights for their organization to be able to function as it does now. The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s in particular has allowed Jehovah's Witnesses to meet together irrespective of race, whereas previously Jehovah's Witnesses, like all other religions, had segregated congregations. In the United States, there were some congregations that were black and some congregations that were white. And we've even had propaganda videos recently on JW Broadcasting effectively saying, well, that was how it was then. And by the way, we would dissuade anyone from participating in civil rights protests, from participating in trying to make things better. We're willing to benefit from the fruits of those protests. We're willing to enjoy the fact that we now live in a more egalitarian society where there is no segregation because of the efforts, because of the struggles of those protesters during the 50s and 60s. We just wouldn't have been involved ourselves. In other words, this is an organization with double standards that always wants to have it both ways. And what we're learning in this part of Stephen Lett's talk is that the leadership of the Jehovah's Witness religion view civil rights, view protesting one's rights, or at least allowing people to protest their rights, as a weakness.
In the video near the beginning of this talk, we saw Michael, the glorified Jesus Christ, depicted coming with the angels to rescue Jehovah's people and destroy this wicked system. But now, if you notice carefully in that video, the wicked were actually shooting their weapons into the sky at Michael. Now, that's laughable, isn't it? Because mankind's most powerful weapons are like wet firecrackers compared to Michael's mighty power. In fact, in the video, Michael was depicted as coming with no defensive equipment such as a breastplate or shield. Doesn't need it. He was depicted only with a sword, an offensive weapon. Now, sometimes in our illustrations, he's depicted with a bow and arrow. Again, only an offensive weapon. But his offensive weapons are powerful, much, much more powerful than needed to do the job of rescuing Jehovah's people and sweeping out of existence Satan's entire wicked system.
What on earth has this talk descended into? Stephen Lett here just going off on this weird tangent about weapons, about what weapons Jesus and the angels are going to use at Armageddon. Well, please explain this to us, because whether it's a bow or whether it's a sword, isn't that just metaphor? Isn't that just figurative? Are we supposed to believe that that these are literal offensive weapons or offensive weapons that are being carried around on horses in the clouds? How does all of that work? Surely the whole imagery of horsemen in the clouds is just metaphor. Are we really supposed to believe that those are real horses carrying real riders with real weapons? And usually they're depicted as these kind of giant horses as well, with giant angels. So giant horses, giant angels, giant offensive weapons. Please explain more, Stephen Lett, about exactly why these weapons are needed. If Jehovah's going to destroy everyone at Armageddon who doesn't acknowledge the authority of Stephen Lett and his associates, why does he need any type of weapon? Why can't Jehovah just snap his fingers and it's done? Why all of the pantomime? Why all of the need for any bows and arrows? And what on earth is all of that about soldiers firing up into the sky?
But now, if you notice carefully in that video, the wicked were actually shooting their weapons into the sky at Michael. Now, that's laughable, isn't it?
Well, I guess so, but it's your illustration. You can't mock the policemen or soldiers for doing this if you've literally made them do it because it's your artwork. So if your artwork doesn't make sense or is laughable, that's on you, Stephen Lett. That's your fault. You don't get to create this fictitious scenario of soldiers shooting into the sky and then mock the soldiers for doing it. Sometimes I genuinely wonder whether this man is unraveling or not. Because he's obviously a bit dim. But this must have been a real thought that went through his head when he saw the artwork. Ha! Stupid fools. Who do they think they are, shooting up into the sky? I know Michael and the angels are more powerful than their puny human weapons. You just haven't thought it through, have you, Stephen? I don't think you're capable, quite frankly, of thinking it through. I think this is fairly convincing evidence that you're either losing your marbles or didn't have them to begin with.
Think about our two brothers shown earlier in this talk. The Christian father and the sick brother. The Christian father ended up behind bars, and our sick brother was not miraculously healed. So was their faith in vain? For a certainty, no. Will Jehovah reward them? For a certainty, yes. If you are facing a similar situation, will Jehovah reward you? Most definitely, yes. Please watch the following video, which features the song that we will sing to conclude our convention. Enjoy this video.
Why should I fear the lion? Why should I fear any foe? With Jehovah by my side, I will not run and hide. My God is with me, this I know. With eyes of faith I see beyond beyond the darkness. With eyes of faith, there's nothing more to fear. With Jehovah I am strong, determined to go on, knowing that my God is always near. With eyes of
those faithful ones before us lived their lives in loyalty. By their faith they endured. Their future is assured. They'll stand again for all to see. With eyes of faith I see beyond the darkness. With eyes of faith there's nothing more to fear. With Jehovah I am strong, determined to go on, knowing that my God is always near. With eyes of faith,
with eyes of faith, I can move a mountain. With eyes of faith, my hope is sure. Where would I be without the faith that helps me see beyond the trials I endure?
I see the wondrous future God has in store for me. I need to be strong. I know it won't be long till Jehovah claims his victory. With eyes of faith, I see beyond the darkness. With eyes of faith, there's nothing more to fear. With Jehovah I am strong, determined to go on, knowing that my God is always near. With eyes of faith. With eyes of faith.
What a powerfully motivating video.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. I thought so too. So I couldn't resist making a cameo in the final video, the final music video of the convention. This is the stirring climax to the Powerful by Faith convention, where we finally get to see You Raise Me Up. I mean, sorry, With Eyes of Faith, or at least we get to see the music video for With Eyes of Faith. Predictably, it's bringing together these characters from the dramatization. We see Japanese Indiana Jones. We see the guy who has the wife and daughter who are suspiciously the same age. They're all in paradise with Daniel. In the original video, Daniel is teaching them and explaining all of his wisdom and experiences to them. I couldn't resist just putting myself in the video, similar to what I did earlier in the convention, because I noticed that some of you enjoyed just seeing me pop up out of nowhere. I couldn't resist it. And quite frankly, I think this propaganda needs to be mocked, needs to be made fun of, because otherwise it's quite triggering, isn't it? This is manipulative, coercive material that's intended to persuade Jehovah's Witnesses that good things await them in the future if they will only obey the governing body, if they will only acknowledge the authority of Stephen Lett and his pals. Based on Stephen Lett's talk here, I would suggest that any such loyalty is sorely misplaced. Again, I'm not convinced that Stephen Lett even has a firm grip on reality. He seems to be confusing characters in dramatizations with actual Jehovah's Witnesses.
The Christian father ended up behind bars, and our sick brother was not miraculously healed. So was their faith in vain? For a certainty, no. Will Jehovah reward them? For a certainty, yes.
Will Jehovah reward them? For a certainty, yes. Stephen, these are fictional characters, and you're promising your audience that Jehovah will, for a certainty, reward them. How can he reward them if they're fictional? How can he reward them if they are imaginary, if they have been invented by the teaching committee? Incidentally, we see William Malenfant make a similar mistake in only the Sunday morning session. Notice what he said at the end of a dramatization showing a fictitious Jehovah's Witness woman mourning the loss of her son.
We deeply sympathize with the sister in the video over the loss of her son.
We deeply sympathize with the fictitious sister in the video over the loss of her son. As I said in my previous rebuttal, I think this speaks volumes about the sincerity of William Malenfant, and by extension, many of the speakers, when they offer sympathies or when they say things like, "We love you," or "the governing body loves you." How seriously can we take those claims when they're even making them regarding fictitious characters? But it's one thing for William Malenfant to confuse reality and fantasy. He's just, after all, a governing body helper. Stephen Lett is a governing body member, and yet he's making promises about what will happen in the future to fictitious dramatization characters.
Dear brothers and sisters, faithful children, cherished interested ones, there's no doubt, right now, we face powerful enemies. For one thing, we have a powerful enemy inside our bodies, inherited sin. It wages an intense war against our desire to do what is right. Secondly, we have the formidable foes, Satan and his demons. Satan is described as a devouring lion, a cunning serpent, a fierce dragon, a sneaky bird catcher, and he's given other evil descriptions. Ephesians 6:12 says we have a struggle, the footnote literally a wrestling, against the wicked spirit forces in the heavenly places. And as mentioned in our publications, there may be tens of thousands of these powerful, evil spirit creatures in the invisible realm waging war against us. Thirdly, we have this wicked world all around us that is trying to assimilate us into joining them in ungodly conduct. And looking at the ratio, we as Jehovah's people are outnumbered by people of the world by about 900 to 1.
Stephen Lett is bringing the final talk of the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention to a close by reminding Jehovah's Witnesses that everyone's out to get them. They have enemies everywhere. Apparently, if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, it's war. And where have we heard this rhetoric already in this convention? Obviously, David Splain, in his 34-minute rant against apostates, declaring war.
Brothers, this is war.
When you're a cult leader, you know that this is exactly the sort of rhetoric that's going to mobilize your followers. You need them to feel besieged. You need them to feel as though everyone's against them, and you need to offer them the solution. You need to offer them the security. In this case, Stephen Lett has repeatedly alluded to a rescue operation, to Armageddon coming and Jesus riding to the rescue of his one true people. Of course, it's not quite a rescue operation, is it? We're talking about global genocide. We're talking about anyone who doesn't recognize Stephen Lett's authority being annihilated. That's not really a rescue operation. That's a global slaughter. That's an atrocity. But for Jehovah's Witnesses, this is supposed to be good news. This is supposed to be their salvation. So the way out, the way to prevail against these enemies is to make sure that you are in that chosen few. And to highlight just how few Jehovah's Witnesses are, Stephen Lett says,
in looking at the ratio, we as Jehovah's people are outnumbered by people of the world by about 900 to 1.
People of the world outnumber us. There are so many of them, and they're trying to assimilate us.
We have this wicked world all around us that is trying to assimilate us into joining them in ungodly conduct.
If you happen to be watching this video as someone who's never been a Jehovah's Witness, you're just interested in what this religion is all about, I hope you're taking notes. This is what this religion thinks of you. As a worldly person, you are trying to assimilate people and trying to force Jehovah's Witnesses into ungodly conduct. You are also part of the overwhelming majority that deserves to be annihilated. Because when Stephen Lett quotes this ratio, what he's quoting is the ratio of people who deserve to be saved versus people who deserve to be annihilated. He's saying, who cares whether they outnumber us? Who cares whether there's only 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses versus nearly 8 billion non-Jehovah's Witnesses? We're going to be saved. Everyone else is going to be destroyed. That's the nature of this group. So don't be fooled by the powerful by faith generic title of this convention. This is not about just generally building your faith or generally being a better person, a more spiritual person, someone more in touch with their spirituality. This is about, just like all the other conventions, this is about being loyal to the governing body so that you can avoid being destroyed.
In the near future, another powerful enemy will come against us. This formidable foe is a coalition of nations called Gog in Ezekiel chapter 38. And Ezekiel 38 says that Gog will come with a great assembly, a vast army, like clouds covering the land. They will come against God's people. Now, this could be a very intimidating situation. But, dear brothers and sisters, your faith will make you stronger than Gog and will keep you stronger until Jehovah miraculously intervenes at Armageddon. And if you think about it, Armageddon really is a rescue operation. He will intervene and he will sweep attacking Gog away forever with a broom of annihilation. So, dear brothers and sisters, faithful children, cherished, interested ones, pray earnestly for faith. Put up a hard fight to maintain your faith. And trust with all your heart that if you have faith, maintain your faith, walk by faith, you definitely will see all of Jehovah's promises fulfilled.
And that's it. That's how this ends. That's how Stephen Lett has chosen to conclude the final talk of the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention with doomsday fear-mongering.
And if you think about it, Armageddon really is a rescue operation. He will intervene, and he will sweep attacking Gog away forever with a broom of annihilation.
It's not really a rescue operation, though, is it, Stephen? It's a genocide. It's the slaughter of literally everyone on the planet who doesn't recognize your authority. That's not a rescue operation. I'm not familiar of there being any Hollywood films about rescue operations where everyone other than those being rescued dies. I mean, literally everyone on the planet. Again, that's not a rescue operation. That is an atrocity. And this is what you have to look forward to as a Jehovah's Witness. You have to look forward to everyone who doesn't share your beliefs being killed. If that's the sort of faith that makes us powerful, I want nothing to do with it. I'd rather live my life thinking for myself and not assuming that everyone who disagrees with me, everyone who doesn't share my beliefs, deserves to perish. That is not a healthy outlook. That is not a positive outlook. That is a psychopathic outlook. Honestly, I'm so glad I no longer have to take this stuff seriously. I feel sorry for Jehovah's Witnesses who do take it seriously. But the good news is, if you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you're either free of this toxicity already or soon will be. The fact that you're willing to listen to my apostate views, to listen to my rebuttal to this convention, shows that you have freeness of mind, you have the courage and bravery to question this nonsense and hopefully develop an immunity to it so that you never need to know what it's like to have your entire life dictated for you by fools like Stephen Lett. But there we are. That's all I have to say about the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention. We made it. Eventually. 6 rebuttals, some of them 3 or 4 hours long. As you can tell, it's been a lot of work. I want to thank my video editor, Tibor, for his many hours of work in editing all of this. And obviously, I need to thank my hundreds of patrons for making all of this possible. Without their amazing support, there's simply no way we'd be able to churn out all of this content and work at this level and intensity. To those of you watching who are patrons, thank you so much. There are others I could thank but won't because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But suffice to say, many people have put work into making these rebuttals possible. I've had members of the JW Watch team creating transcripts so that I've not had to watch every single minute of the convention. I've had a member of the JW Watch team, Kim Silvio, doing QC, quality control checks, so that I don't have to watch absolutely every minute of what Tibor has edited. I can just immediately move on to creating the next rebuttal. So many people have been involved. I want to thank all of you. I will just answer the question, is this the worst convention ever? Because obviously that's how I titled my rebuttals to the 2016 convention. I know a lot of you will be looking at this convention thinking, come on, Lloyd, how can it get any worse than this? For me personally, and I'm not the final word on this, for me personally, it's going to take a lot to beat the 2016 Remain Loyal to Jehovah convention, because one of the main things that made that particular convention so bad was the focus on shunning. Despite all of the paranoia and fear-mongering and persecution complex and Great Tribulation reenactments and blasting of apostates in this convention, we've at least had very little on shunning. And that's honestly a relief to me as someone who has numerous relatives who are Jehovah's Witnesses. I breathe a sigh of relief whenever there is not so much said on the issue of shunning, because ultimately it's the relationships that matter. And for this to be a truly, truly bad convention, you would need relationships to suffer through reminders for Jehovah's Witnesses to shun disfellowshipped ones. I, for one, am relieved. I'm glad that we've not had that in this convention, although this has been definitely one of the worst. In particular, David Splain's 34-minute anti-apostate rant was extraordinary. And as I've said repeatedly, that's going to come back and haunt them. We will be talking about that for years to come. It wouldn't surprise me if David Splain is already regretting it, because there will be fallout from this. There will be Jehovah's Witnesses who see that and who see Stephen Lett's reprise of the talk in this talk that we've just looked at. There will be witnesses who see that and think, I want to know what all this is about. They keep banging on about apostates and how apostates are lying. I want to see this for myself. So David Splain and Stephen Lett are doing my work for me at this point, for which I'm kind of grateful. I see it as a net positive, and I'm going to be fascinated to see how many people end up waking up due to this hateful vitriol. But that's all I have for you. I don't want to say a single thing more about this convention. I need to detox. I need to get all of this horrible propaganda out of my mind and go away with my family and just unwind for a while. I hope you've enjoyed these rebuttals. Please do remember to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.